Today we're watching a kind of slow-motion shock to the system. But make no mistake, what looks like dry trade policy actually changes prices at the grocery store, the health of farms, the value of your savings, and the chips inside the phones and cars we rely on. In the next few minutes, I'll walk you through why the US-China tech rivalry matters to your life, why a single nanosecond can tilt the balance, and what the likely fallout looks like for farmers, engineers, businesses, and ordinary people. Stay with me. At the end, I'll give one practical sign to watch that tells you if the next year gets better or worse. This fight is not about slogans. It's about control. Who builds the best chips? Who sets the standards for AI and digital payments? Who can block the other from critical tools? At the center right now is a small but powerful policy move. The US has widened its export blacklist so that when one company gets designated, its subsidiaries, even shell companies and offshore units, are covered automatically. That's a big deal. The immediate idea is simple: close loopholes. The consequence is messy. Suddenly, thousands of entities around the world that touch Chinese supply chains face new compliance burdens and higher costs. Why would Washington do this? 3 blunt reasons. National security. The worry that advanced chips, AI tools, or dual-use technologies could be turned to military or surveillance uses. Economic leverage. Using approvals or denials as bargaining chips in trade talks. And containment. Slowing China's tech climb so the US keeps an edge. Those aims may sound reasonable on paper, but each one carries trade-offs. The very companies and markets the US hopes to protect are often deeply reliant on the Chinese market, so policies meant to squeeze can also squeeze American firms. Here's one hook you'll want to remember. This isn't slow motion. It's the nanosecond race. When NVIDIA's CEO said China is not years behind but nanoseconds behind, he wasn't being poetic. In semiconductors, a tiny timing or architecture advantage can cascade into a much bigger lead. That's why chips matter so much. They aren't just computer parts, they are leverage. The impact reaches beyond silicon. Take American farmers. Soybeans were once a steady $12 billion export earner to China. Trade skirmishes, tariffs, and retaliation drove those exports down. For a community that lives off narrow margins, that's devastating. When politics interrupts trade, it's small towns and families who pay the price. That's the human side too often missing from policy debates. A sanction or a blacklist may be aimed at an abstract target in a capital city, but the shock lands on a combine in Iowa or a packing plant in Illinois. Now, back to chips. Semiconductors are the crown jewel of modern industry. Phones, cars, data centers, military systems, everything runs on them. The US has tried to throttle China's access to the most advanced equipment and designs. The idea: slow the rise, keep a technical lead. The reality: it creates incentives for China to go its own way. Money flows into domestic chip design, custom silicon, AI infrastructure, and alternative supply chains. Companies that once relied on Western tools are now building their own. That's the next hook. Restrictions can accelerate self-reliance. Every sanction pushes Beijing and Chinese firms to pour more resources into homegrown capability. You can slow someone for a while, but you can also force them to innovate in directions they might otherwise have ignored. The result can be surprising. Instead of maintaining an advantage, restrictive policies can create 2 parallel ecosystems, each innovative but incompatible, and both costly to the rest of the world. China's response has been predictable and pragmatic. Beijing has used trade probes, hinted at rare earth export controls, and kept pressure on foreign companies through various investigations. At the same time, some gestures, like stepping back from certain probes, are meant to show restraint. But the message is clear: for every move, Beijing has counters. The bigger the escalation, the more likely we see retaliation in areas like tariffs, regulatory pressure on foreign firms inside China, or even restrictions on critical materials. Here's a mid-video hook to keep you tuned in. The next 6 months will tell us whether the world drifts into fragmentation. Separate tech stacks, separate payment rails, separate standards, or whether leaders find a way to manage competition without balkanizing the global economy. That's not speculation, it's the practical fork in the road. So what's happening on the ground among companies? We are seeing creative adaptations. Some Chinese firms are optimizing software to make less powerful chips perform like better ones. Others are redesigning systems to rely less on restricted components. Startups, often supported by government funding, are racing to build GPUs, accelerators, and software tuned to local hardware. That matters because when hardware and software are tightly integrated, software innovations can offset hardware gaps faster than many policymakers expect. And yet export controls are not powerless. They raise costs, create delays, and in some cases block access to top-tier tools. But academic papers and industry practice both show that controls are porous. Components get rerouted, software is optimized, and companies find third-party channels. The longer controls last, the more incentive there is to substitute, adapt, and eventually reduce dependence on the restricted sources. In short, bans create a harsh discipline, but they also create urgency. At this point, let me ask a small favor. If you're finding this useful, please hit like and share this video so others can follow along. That really helps this topic reach people who need to know what's happening. Let's be blunt about the broader geometry. We are moving toward a world where politics shapes engineering and economics. Allies that once coordinated freely will now weigh national interests against alliance obligations. Japan or the Netherlands may restrict certain equipment, not because they want to, but because they face pressure and strategic calculations. When export rulebooks get complicated, companies face tough choices: follow one regime or another, restructure supply chains, or take a hit to business. Here's the second engagement hook. And I want to hear from you. Which of these shifts worries you most? Is it higher prices at the supermarket, fewer choices in electronics, the geopoliticization of technology, or the idea of divided internet standards? Drop a comment below with your top concern. I read the comments and will respond. Financial decoupling is another thread. China is experimenting with payment rails, cross-border digital currency research, and clearing systems that reduce reliance on Western financial infrastructure. If tech fragmentation pairs with financial decoupling, multinational trade and investment will face a new complexity. For businesses and governments, that raises compliance burdens and strategic uncertainty. For consumers, it can mean slower upgrades, new compatibility headaches, and occasional shortages. So where does this leave us? Practical, sober takeaways. First, restrictions are a blunt instrument. They can delay, deter, and destabilize, but they rarely stop determined, well-funded national efforts to close gaps. Second, the quickest route out of this uncertainty is not purely defensive. For the US and its partners, doubling down on domestic innovation, workforce training, and resilient supply chains is the real long game. Third, for ordinary people and investors, diversification matters. Diversify suppliers, diversify information sources, and be skeptical of any single narrative that promises easy wins from trade policy. Finally, watch 3 signals in the months to come. Big public investments in domestic chip fabs. They show governments are choosing to outspend rather than outblock. Major new standards or payment rails announced by blocks of countries, those signal fragmentation, and any sudden regulatory retaliation that targets consumer-facing firms. Those are the actions that make supply shocks real. If you made it this far, thank you. You now have a sharper sense of how policy decisions translate into everyday consequences. If this topic matters to you, please hit like, subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you won't miss future updates. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.